Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I think we'll get started while people are still coming in. Hopefully you can hear me all right. If you're not able to hear us, please speak up, wave a hand, and we can turn on the mics or bring them up a little bit closer. There we go. Thank you. Well, thanks for coming to this session. We're going to be talking about reforestation. My name is John Remucal. I'm the Associate Director of Nature-Based Solutions at the Climate Action Reserve. Before we get to our panelists today and the discussion, I did want to provide just a little bit of context for some things that are likely to come up during the discussion. So as many of you know, reforestation has been a significant focus among natural climate solutions for the past few years. And within that focus, there is a desire to not just put trees in the ground, but to make sure there are long-lasting benefits for both the environment and local communities. But there's a really critical challenge that reforestation efforts all face in that there are significant upfront costs that have to be borne for a number of years, 15, 20, 30 years in some cases before the forest will actually produce something that can be sold by the landowner, whether that's timber or carbon or any other products that are coming out of the forest. For forest carbon projects, it's typically 15, 20 years or more. There are registries out there that are trying to address this issue in particular, and for our part at the Reserve, one thing that we are doing is we have our Climate Forward program that is an ex-ante crediting program. And what that does is it allows for the credits to be issued essentially near the start of the project to try to address that timing issue so you don't have to wait to have credits issued. And those credits that we issue are called forecast mitigation units, or FMUs. They're a little bit different than our what you might call traditional offset credits, our climate reserve tons or CRTs. In addition to that, we're also providing a pathway for these projects that are coming in under our Climate Forward program to come back later and transition those projects and the associated FMUs that they've been issued to our conventional offset program as well. And what that's really intended to do is to provide the credit buyers with more conventional ex post credits that they are more familiar with and comfortable with. And so I'll probably leave it at that, and we can get to our panel. I'm really excited to have this group of people up here and looking forward to the discussion that we're going to have. So what I'd like to have us start with is just have each of our panel members introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their organization, what they're focused on, in particular around reforestation, and then we'll get into more of a discussion after some introductions. So, PJ, if you'd like to start.
I'll start. Hi, everybody, and good afternoon. I'm PJ Marshall with Restore the Earth Foundation, and we're a 501c3 not-for-profit. Our focus is restoring 1 million acres of forest in the Mississippi River Basin, third largest watershed on Earth. What's really key to our initiative are our private-public partnerships and being able to deliver on this. Our public partnerships actually are the ones that identify and prioritize the sites where we're doing reforestation. They also bring to the table matching funding for the private funding that we bring to the table to deliver on this reforestation. They also bring to the table permanent conservation easements that are permanent, long term, and they issue them, they hold them, and they manage them throughout the process. From the private standpoint, most of it is coming in from the funding standpoint. We also have, related to the carbon development, we have a partnership with Climeco that is responsible for developing and monetizing and in some cases selling the carbon offsets that are generated by our reforestation projects. Another real key factor is we developed with our corporate partners ecometrics, which can monitor, monetize, and or value in monetized terms the environmental, social, and economic co-benefit impacts that are then, those values are third-party verified and submitted to our partners in a report that, then they can actually account for these values on their financials if they'd like. Another factor that's involved in this is whenever we are involved in our projects, Restore the Earth owns all of the green attributes. So we have the ability to then issue the offsets that are generated to those funding partners proportionate to their investment in our projects.
Great. Lots of good work.
You like that? You like that? You like that?
So, well, to follow. So, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Barbara Harrison. I'm the Vice President of Offsets and Emerging as part of Chevron New Energies. And for those of you that aren't familiar, Chevron New Energies was stood up last year as part of Chevron to really help to accelerate our energy transition ambitions across Chevron. And so as part of New Energies, we have three primary businesses that have been stood up: a carbon capture, utilization and storage business, a hydrogen business, and then the offsets and emerging business that I head up. And then we also partner very closely with our downstream business on accelerating a lot of our moves at our refineries in renewable fuels and biofuel feedstock, et cetera. As part of my remit in offsets and emerging, as you know, we're a California-based company. We have a lot of U.S. operations. We've been obviously heavily involved in carbon markets really since they've started, both in compliance and in voluntary markets. But that's really been more on the trading aspect as part of our trading organization. And we recognize the real value in helping to accelerate a lot of the great work that was happening in investment. And so my team is responsible for helping to identify, develop, partner with, and fund offset generation projects. And that's the work we've been doing. And we've done some of that with Restore the Earth Foundation, which has been fantastic. And then on the emerging side of the business, it's really focused on commercializing the next generation of lower carbon energy solutions. So looking at offshore wind, looking at novel geothermal, and really partnering very closely with our tech ventures organization of where is that next generation of energy solutions. So that's a little bit about me and the organization. Julius.
Thank you, everyone. It's great to be here with you. I'm Julius Pasay, the Executive Director of the Climate Trust. Climate Trust is a nonprofit organization. I believe we're one of the oldest carbon entities in the nation. We're celebrating our 25th year in operation this year. And we, over the years, have done a lot of different work from deploying offset funds from Oregon utilities starting in 1997 to about 6 years ago, we launched a model private equity fund, Climate Trust Capital, that we deployed into forestry, biodigester, and grassland projects to demonstrate, how you could invest into carbon projects. And now we're really focused on continuing to develop work, particularly in the natural climate solutions space, and particularly in areas where it's been historically challenging to develop projects. So not necessarily, big IFM projects, but areas like reforestation, afforestation. I'm also a certified forester, and so this is really passionate for me more than beyond that, the carbon. So all the co-benefits that you mentioned are dear to my heart, and I think probably everyone in this room. So thank you.
Great, thank you all for introducing yourselves. I guess we'll start off. There have been a number of efforts out there, whether it's media coverage or efforts by collaborative groups like Nature for Climate, where they have kind of highlighted a number of issues around what makes for successful reforestation. So I'm wondering, in your eyes, what makes for a high-quality reforestation project, and what are the key measures for success for projects that you want to be involved with? PJ, we can start with you.
Sure. So, from in our experience, I mean, a real key to having our public partners is that the sites that our high-quality reforestation projects are focused on are degraded lands, and they can be degraded lands in a floodplain, or they can be marginal ag lands that are very much degraded, that and in particular in the Mississippi River Basin were once forest and now need to be restored. So if we're looking at that, we want to focus on the degraded lands. Working with our partners, we use scientific best practices to not only address what native species needs to be reestablished, and with climate change sometimes it's a little bit of an adjustment. Also, the hydrological considerations, in particular in that area, are very important. And then the ability to place these permanent conservation easements on these sites so that we're assured that they're going to be properly managed over a long period of time, and that we have taken into consideration engaging stakeholders in the area so that we have a clear understanding of first of all, the baseline of where the sites kind of are when we get started, and then be able to set out a basically theory of change or a concept to be able to evaluate the kind of environmental, social, and economic impacts that these reforestation projects are, and monitor those and account for them as the project is established and continues on. So, we're looking for high quality, long lasting forests that really deliver on the impacts that forests can have.
Thanks, PJ. Barbara, why don't you?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a thorough answer from PJ. To be honest, there's not a huge amount to add, and I think what's interesting is you get to this space, no matter where you're coming at it as you're looking to do these projects, you typically have very strong alignment between all of your partners of what is going to make it quality, right? And absolute bare minimum is it ecologically appropriate? Are we, and to your point, sometimes that shifts over time. So is it ecologically appropriate? Do no harm as an absolute bare minimum. The permanence issue, we're very used to in our business of doing projects that develop over a long time, but these are even more, right? And so ensuring that when we've all retired and are enjoying the co-benefits of some of the reforestation projects we're investing in, that they will continue to deliver what we promise they will deliver. And I do think the partnership aspect is really important, and that's both as we look at who to partner with in developing these projects, but it's also the local partnership and being able to ensure that the projects that we look to do are ones that really add value to the area. And you can get that by making sure you are partnering with local governments, local municipalities, etc. And I think as you look and take some of those very high-level criteria, it quickly screens out a lot of not good opportunities, and it quickly bubbles to the top the ones to do. But if you've met some of that, it's pretty guaranteed that the rest of the secondary kind of benefits may come along with it.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything said. The only thing I might add there is, I think we're all very focused on climate mitigation here and reducing emissions. But I think these projects in particular, especially when they're focused in the way that the other two panelists have just described, I think really give us some really climate adaptation and resilience benefits that I don't think we talk about too frequently, but I think it's a really important story to tell, especially in light of other types of, offsets that are out there or project types, because, we all know, I think everyone in this room, that we already are having effects of climate change. It's unavoidable at this point. And so these types of projects can really benefit all sorts of species and ecosystems, help them adapt, and also, provide some resilience for communities as well.
Great point.
All right, thanks, Julius. Next, I want to shift a little bit. There's been some discussion at this conference and beyond about making a distinction between different types of projects and the types of credits that they're producing, in particular a focus on removals as a means of addressing climate change and the importance of that and how that might be different from avoided emissions, for example. I'm wondering how much that kind of a distinction really means to your work, or if that's helpful or if it presents any challenges in particular, or if it maybe doesn't have that much of a meaning to you if you're really primarily just focused on developing projects and making the impact that you can through reforestation efforts. Maybe Julius, let's come back in the other direction.
Sure. Yeah, I think that distinction is not super helpful in a lot of ways, generally speaking, but in a narrow way is helpful because to do, as was mentioned, to do these afforestation projects takes a lot of money up front. And so when you're trying to figure out how to finance them, having that extra price right now where we're at, with removal credits can be very helpful. But in the long term, we feel that we really shouldn't be ignoring protecting the really big carbon stores, the biodiverse carbon stores that are in a lot of the projects that, are classified as reductions in those types of credits. So I think that's hugely important and dangerous to, discount reductions and try to wholly shift towards removals. Really think it's important to have both. I think it's going to be difficult to have one without the other, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Barbara, any?
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I'm the eternal optimist, so I'll say it's helpful because at least it means people are having the conversation, right? So in that sense, maybe there's some help to be had. And it's come up at a number of the sessions I've had the pleasure of attending today, and it does feel, I think, not dissimilar to a lot of views. It's going to be an all of the above solution, right? I talked a little bit about our new energies business, and we're clearly embracing the all of the above. We're focused on CCUS, which is at the removal end of things, but we're also focused on hydrogen, which ultimately is going to be avoidance around some of the emissions and renewable power, et cetera, as we look at it. And I think then as you get to just looking at the offsets and the type of investments we can make, at the end of the day, we need to be looking at that. I do think over time we're going to see policy and regulation help to really drive a lot of the avoidance out of being offset generation projects just over the length of span. But ultimately we're going to need to do more of the removal and more of those technologically advanced removal projects too. And in order to get there, you're going to have a suite of customers that are going to be looking at options. And as you said, price can play a big part in that. And so to be able to make those kind of technological developments and drive the cost curve down, similar to what we've seen in renewable power, solar, wind, etc., we're going to have to be doing all of the above as we shift more and more in the future towards more removal. That's where I see the industry going. And I think that's the rate at which we get there is going to be the really interesting part to watch how that plays out.
Yeah. Great, thanks, Barbara.
Yeah.
PJ, anything to
No, I
add for
think,
your point?
obviously we're doing reforestation because we want to add to that, that full complement of forests that already exist. And what they're being able to do right now is we're at a status quo and maintaining as it relates to, carbon emission reductions. But adding to that stock is really the focus that we feel is really necessary to move it forward. So it is all of the above. Mm-hmm.
Great, thanks. So each of you comes to reforestation, with different perspectives in terms of the overarching goals and intentions that you have, with carbon obviously being important, but perhaps not the only thing you look at. Obviously, PJ, you've mentioned you have a whole host of metrics that you look at. So I'm wondering if you can each kind of touch on some of those non-carbon outcomes that you're really looking at. You've touched on it a little bit, PJ. Maybe you can expand a little bit more. But just what else besides carbon specifically are you looking at with these projects?
Well, yeah, I mean, in particular in the Mississippi River Basin, a big challenge there has been nutrient runoff. And that's what's creating the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. So that's obviously stopping erosion, getting erosion under control, being able to filter those nutrients if, they're still running off. And so that's a major benefit that's coming to the table, in addition to reestablishing and enhancing habitat, biodiversity, the ability to, and in that area as well, you've got major flood considerations. So you're dealing with community resiliency as you get down to the Gulf Coast. You have storms that, you're trying to mitigate storm and waves and wind issues that come with those storms. So there are so many multiple additional benefits to reestablishing these natural systems, in particular the forest and the areas where we're focusing.
Great. Barbara, is there anything in particular that you focus on when you're looking at projects that you want to support?
Yeah, and maybe I'll just take a different bit of a bent on it, because PJ did a great job talking about, as you look at reforestation in particular, as we look at where we currently are and the need to be able to accelerate lower carbon solutions, right? Reforestation is going to be a key part of it. And a reason why it's going to play such a critical role is there's huge swaths of the industry where abatement and removal is going to be incredibly difficult. We're a very customer-centric organization, and I've worked in North America, I've worked in Asia, and you have customers coming to a company like Chevron, and they're looking for lower carbon solutions in the near term, and the industry is shifting, but we're not shifting at the pace that demand is requiring it right now or requesting it right now. And we'll continue to get there, and we'll continue to make the investments. But in investing in reforestation projects, what it allows is industries who are very well intentioned and wanting to shift. A good example would be something like the mining industry, right? They consume huge amounts of diesel. We don't have the production of renewable diesel at the type of scale to be able to mix it. It's incredibly difficult to move to a renewable power or to electrical, given the scale of the industry they're operating. And so providing offset paired products, et cetera, through things like reforestation allows them a journey or a pathway to be able to get to true low carbon or lower carbon solutions in the long term. So if we look at sort of, PJ did a great job of what's the additional benefits of this. If I look at it at a more macro level of what's the benefits of doing these type of projects and being able to kind of shift entire industries to where they want to go.
Julius, anything to?
Sure, yeah, maybe I'll just add maybe a point of comparison to PJ's example. Some of the projects we're focused on are in the American West in the post-wildfire context. And so some of the major concerns there, after a big wildfire that's pretty devastating, you're going to have erosion and sedimentation to waterways and things like that. So that's one of our big focuses, right, is restoration after big natural disturbance and trying to get trees on the ground quickly. There's a lack of funding for that. And also, some of those areas, those forests are a big economic resource for rural communities, both culturally but also economically. And so, for us, we really try to focus on that aspect too, where, those are frontline communities, right? And so, again, that resilience piece, not just on the ecosystem, but for the community itself, are some of the big things we look at.
Great, thanks. So what are some of the major obstacles that you all see to being successful with your reforestation efforts or the projects that you want to support? Thinking both near term and long term. We've heard about how the demand for offsets and for removals in particular is just expected to skyrocket. Can we actually get there? Are there obstacles that are going to get in the way of us scaling up to what we need to do and to being able to do reforestation that we want in the ways that we want to be able to do it? Julius, if you want to.
Sure. I think we mentioned it a few times, but the early finance to get trees in the ground, it's really, really expensive, right? You might be anywhere from $250 to several $1,000s, depending on where you are and what the site looks like. If there's a lot of shrub or brush layer, or if it's compacted because it was a mountaintop removal site and they seeded it to grass and then compacted it. And then I think right now we're kind of in a phase where I know other groups are looking at reforestation projects, and I think it's very challenging to get landowners signed up to programs. It's a new space. I think there's a lot of skepticism out there. So that I think are some of the big near-term challenges. And long-term, I don't know, I sometimes like to imagine what the world's going to look like and land use is going to look like and land use conflicts are going to look like when sequestering carbon is going to potentially be, a huge use of land. So that's, I don't really know what that'll exactly look like, but yeah.
Barbara, anything?
Yeah, I think as you talked about it, right, it's access to the land, it's the partnership with the landowners to be able to do it. I think as we start to see more and more capital shifting towards it, and hopefully addressing your first point, right, as more capital is now coming into these markets, you're going to start to run into some practical considerations, right? In order to be able to plant a forest, you've got to be collecting the seeds. We were chatting about this yesterday. There's huge practical considerations as we look at the kind of scale of the projects that are going to need to be done in order to be economic, right? And so doing very small sites or multiple small sites has not only then the upfront cost, but also much higher operating costs for ensure the right kind of verification and everything is in place. And so it's finding those larger site areas, but then you get into the practical or logistical implications of then being able to plant very large swaths of land in significant times. But to me, they're great problems to have, right? Because it means there's so many projects happening that you're starting to run into these issues, but it is a real practical consideration. And so trying to have the foresight of thinking not just what are we doing next season, but where are we going to go in the long term, and what does this development look like over, the next 5-10 years, to be able to get ahead of some of those problems, I think is a way that we can really address it. So we just keep running into, you keep hitting the opportunity to develop more.
PJ, anything?
We have no problem with access to land. Our big challenge, and actually we have a very good partner in this, and it's really interesting to see our funding partners, Barbara just got into this, our funding partners who, and she didn't feel this way, but we've had funding partners who think that these trees are just available and you pick them off the shelf.
Home Depot.
Yeah, Home Depot. And so from our standpoint, our objective is delivering on high quality projects, so we're not just going to stick a bare root seedling stick in the ground. So, and it starts with, being able to collect high quality seeds, germinating these trees from seeds, growing them good root systems over a period of time. So you've got Mother Nature, you've got the scale of all the seeds that we are working with are collected by hand. So you're working within a time frame of growing these trees. The labor for planting these trees, we just finished a 4,000-acre project that actually they finished in about 7 weeks. It took them 7 weeks to do it. We anticipated it was going to take almost 3 months to do it, but where does that labor come from legally, and how do you manage that? So it's from a scaling standpoint, and I don't know if Brandon Pike is in here, but we have an unbelievable growing and planting partner who has a strategic and a business approach to working with us, and those kinds of critical challenges are now just being, we're just addressing them to scale them bigger and bigger almost every year. So that's really been our, again, major access to land, fabulous partners, and being able to deliver, but it's really the logistics of getting the successful projects on the ground.
Are there any critical infrastructural weak points that any of you see in terms of being able to scale up reforestation in the future? And maybe part of that includes the labor force that's available.
Absolutely. I mean, the labor force, we use legal migrants, and, you have to plan for that almost a year in advance to go through the process, and then the availability. I mean, that's challenging. It's challenging for everyone to provide for the appropriate housing and transportation and all of the considerations, because you are a team, and being able to foster and being able to manage those relationships very effectively. Mm-hmm. It is a challenge.
Yeah. Barbara or Julius, anything that you want to add? Okay. So maybe on the flip side, what do each of you find to be the most promising around the reforestation efforts that you're involved with, or what do you see that you're the most hopeful or excited about around reforestation? Maybe Barbara, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about, a project that we did with Restore the Earth that we announced a couple of weeks ago, and it's about a 10,000-acre project, and we were able to donate close to 2,000 acres of that from some of our legacy land associated with our base business. And, there's a huge amount of co-benefits, but all of our employees, they work in the area, they're from the area, and the excitement to see land that was sitting there essentially doing nothing, right, now being turned into something that will create employment in the short term for the development, but have long-term benefits as well for the area. And there is, I mean, the issues along the Gulf Coast are well known around coastal erosion, around flooding, etc. And developing these types of projects can help to address some of those issues. And so I will say is you can look at it and think of it as theoretically and everything on paper, but you know, when I went out and visited the site and went with some employees from the local business unit and just see their excitement, they've grown up for generations in the area and they've seen how, you know, the coast has changed and seen fishing patterns and the impact that it has, etc. And seeing that kind of level of excitement of reinvestment with real true co-benefits in local communities, that to me is the really exciting part, on top of the climate benefits and everything else that we'll get. It's that real personal impact to folks.
PJ, how about you?
No, I agree. I think, you know, folks are becoming more aware of the importance of it, and honestly, we've been doing this since 2008, and I think the synergy and the excitement is really, we feel the difference, you know, just in the last 2 years, which of course we're delighted about.
Yeah. Julius, how about you?
Yeah, I would just say I think it's amazing to see that, you know, this can start to take off, and I think reforestation, afforestation. I mean, we're in a mass extinction, geologically speaking, and so if we can start really turning things around, and we're actually going to start doing some healing of the planet, I think is pretty incredible. And I think the case for that with this type of project is really apparent and obvious. So I don't know, I like to think we're turning a corner here. Trying to be an optimist. So
He's right.
Great. Are there any opportunities that you see in reforestation as being, particularly ripe for being able to kind of take advantage for the current environment that we're in terms of, this interest in expanding reforestation efforts? Are there opportunities that are more perhaps shovel-ready than others that you see? Or is it just kind of you're looking for all opportunities? I guess, PJ, you have maybe a pretty well-honed focus already. But even within that, are there particular areas that you see as being something you could take advantage of sooner rather than later, as opposed to relative to other areas that you might focus on?
Well, yeah, I mean, with the 1 million acres, again, our partners, there's 6 million acres easily in this Mississippi River Basin from southern Illinois into the Gulf Coast. Our partners determined that 1 million acres was a tipping point, and so all these projects really are shovel ready based on the funding that's available to move forward. And we have two models, but the model that relates to being on private lands, our partners, the USDA NRCS, has these landowners lined up waiting to participate in these projects, again, and depending on funding. And so really from our standpoint, no problem with access to land, no problem with, being able to identify and prioritize moving on these projects. It's really now bringing all the funding part of it together and then being able to move forward with the implementation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Barbara, anything?
No, I think as PJ touched on, I think that is the interesting, as you've kind of seen us hit a bit of a pivot in this world, is there is now a lot more funding available. And as you mentioned, with efficient, transparent markets continuing to operate, I think that will continue to encourage more and more funding coming into it. So I think you can look at a large scale and say, what are we doing? And there's some great work that's happening and more that will be coming out later this year. But what are we doing to ensure that those transparent markets continue to exist, so that the funding, as people make those funding decisions that are decades long in terms of how long it will take to be able to see the returns, that they're really confident that these are the right projects. But I think there's a lot of things coming together very simultaneously over the next year or so, in a couple of years, that will continue to see that accelerate. And then we get back to our previous comments around, then you start getting into logistics issues and everything else, but we'll overcome those. The other area I will say is I think it's, there's certain aspects associated with reforestation that are Mother Nature, right, around seed collection, etc. I think there will be more opportunity around some of the verification and validation and some of the technologies we're starting to see there, to be able to drive even more investment in that space. I think that's an interesting space to watch in this area.
Yeah. Julius, how about you? Are there any areas that you see for big opportunities?
Well, I just want to build on Barbara's last point there a little bit. I think their technology, I think, can really help. A lot of these afforestation projects, not all of them, right? If there's some standing trees or the site is really variable, but it's a relatively homogeneous forest, especially in the terms of a time frame of a carbon project, or at least the beginning years. So I think there's probably some efficiencies from verification and inventory. We could probably rely on some remote sensing or satellite imagery to try to make things a little bit easier, especially in those early years. It's a lot different than a mature forest that's got really heterogeneous structure. And then, in terms of opportunities, I'm really excited to see, I know there's a lot of folks in here who are working on these types of projects and trying to get them off the ground. I think there's lots of opportunity. And I'm excited to see all the projects where we're putting trees in the right place, because I think trees in certain places are more important for all the things we've talked about than others, riparian buffers in the Midwest, right? We've got every year there's a big eutrophic zone in the Delta, in the Gulf. We can start reducing runoff that way. There's a lot of places where we can put trees on the ground to have really high impact outcomes. So,
Great, thanks. Are there any policies or programs or changes to existing policies or programs that you think would help accelerate reforestation efforts? Or any particular barriers that you see from any policies or programs that are out there?
Well, because we have a strong public partnership. Actually, the big, not so much policy, but I think it's really, one of the things that we're working on right now is there's been submitted a Sustains Act by the House Ag Committee that would really allow for more funding available for the public matching, from the public matching fund standpoint, because they're very eager, to be a part of really accelerating this whole process. But the idea is to have the public funding available through this kind of activity with the government that doesn't take away from existing programs where other producers and landowners are benefiting. So I don't think it's I can't really say it's an obstacle, but it's a challenge to move it forward to really increase the amount of funding that's available that can really support these public-private partnerships across the board, not just with us, but across the board, to really accelerate the process. And I really think those private-public partnerships are important because they allow for all of this activity to be amplified, where it really creates an ability to move faster, good in a good way, and do bigger projects so that we have more impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Barbara or Julius, anything you want to add?
Maybe a different bent on it as well. Agreeing with everything PJ said, is I do think some of the transparency into the methodologies and protocols around reforestation and for deforestation avoidance projects. There was some great discussion in some earlier sessions as you talked about some of the challenges of that, and really having people be able to very clearly understand exactly what they're buying when they're buying from credits associated with these types of projects. I think as we continue to see that transparency come into the market, a little bit more standardization come into the market across the different registries, that's only going to help to encourage it. So I do completely agree some of the public policy is going to be necessary. The main issue with some of this is permanence, and so as some of our policy shifts to ensure, permanence and that on the land with easements is going to be critical. The other aspect, I think, on the other side, to make sure that the markets continue to be very robust to allow the investment to continue to occur, I think is another area of focus.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with all that wholeheartedly. I also think there's a lot of work to do just on that, back on that, like accessing and communicating with landowners and things. I think there's a great network of forest professionals, extension agents out there. I mean, I think there are a lot of states, and those agencies seem to be becoming more and more keen, or more, their understanding is becoming more nuanced of carbon markets. And I think with this focus on afforestation, reforestation, I think that hopefully that can, some work there, whether policy or funding in those realms might be able to help us amplify this work and getting trees on the ground.
Great. I think at this point I'll open it up for questions from anyone in the audience, if there are any at the moment. Yep, back here.
First question, so in regards to the public-private partnerships, I know that the National Forest Foundation has done a number of reforestation projects on federal lands, following severe wildfire, but those projects have really struggled with issues like soil alteration that come after high-severity fire, right? Both for ceiling survival and the view of the species being it. And I was wondering if you guys are running into the same challenge and what sort of ideas you have to help post-fire reforestation.
I really couldn't hear.
It's the
Could you-
post-fire
Yeah.
reforestation, some challenges. I think one of the big challenges, especially on national forest land, is getting out there quickly, and I think there's a fair amount of red tape that's been recognized about getting out there quickly. And also in terms of the carbon markets, carbon ownership and being able to trade credits, there's a big barrier right now with the federal government in terms of who's going to own that carbon and how you bring that onto the market. So I think that's a really, really big challenge, because there's obviously a huge amount of opportunity to sequester carbon in those areas.
Yeah, Jeremy.
Jeremy Maynard, Moderator Foundation. Thanks for the comments. PJ, could you talk a little bit about the conversion process of the use from XANX post and your project? How long does that take typically?
Well, actually, we haven't had an FMU project yet. I mean, we've been promoting FMUs because obviously from an investment standpoint, we think it's an opportunity for corporations to look at what their future emissions are going to be and really provide for those future emissions by making the investment up front and knowing that they have really accounted for what those future emissions are going to be. I have to say that we're at that balance right now where it's not been readily adopted, and actually folks will say that they want to use, whether it's VCS and Vera, or they want to use ACR, because that's something that is more, well, it's been something that's been proven, has been around for a long time, although both of those registries are creating forward programs right now. So we have a lot of folks that are interested in the FMUs and the Climate Forward program, but getting that first adopter, at least with our projects, has not taken place yet. So we're eager to move forward on that and then have an opportunity, because it's long term as well, even though they're getting they're being able to account for it up front. They're interested in that project being in existence, for 50 to 80 years. And so having the opportunity down the road to do a conversion is their option. So it's not been in play in reality yet.
Any other questions?
There's one right here.
Oh, no. Go ahead.
Another question for Julius. Julius, you talked about the cost, the upfront cost, and I'm wondering, is all of this premised on the assumption that there's a zero cost to the land? And the reason I'm asking that is because, it costs $500 to replant a forest, or to afforest a piece of property per acre, and you're looking at 5 or 6 years before you get credit off that, and you're going to get 1 to 2 credits maybe, so you're looking at kind of a $50 a year stream of payments in the future. It doesn't pencil out, so especially if you have to pay for land. So how do you make it work?
That did not include land costs. That's why we're big proponents of the ex-ante crediting to get credits up front to help with that finance. I think, I think there's a variety of interests, it seems, among different buyers and what their preferences are for ex ante or ex post. I think whichever route it is, there's going to be some type of upfront investment, either from that end user of the credits or some other type of investor, and looking at, at least a decade, probably multi-decade. I mean, we're talking about, but we should be doing this, right? I think it may be new. As a forester, looking at decadal timescales is like, okay, yeah, that's what we do all the time. But certainly that's not what all the end buyers are necessarily looking at, or folks trying to use credits. And I would encourage everyone in this room to start doing that. We're looking at a problem that's going to take a really long time to fix. So we need to be thinking that long term. That's how to make it work is, higher prices are helping, but looking further out in terms of time frame.
Wait a minute, because I'd like to know about the projects that cost a couple $100 to reforest. I mean, that's not something that we're dealing with. We're on a minimum basis with matching funds, and this does not include the matching funds. Our projects right now are at $2,500 an acre, and if we didn't have the matching funds, they'd be a good $5,000 an acre to really do them properly. So I'd like to know where these projects are for a couple $100 an acre, and that's not buying the land. Nobody? Yeah.
Just building on that a little bit, can you explain a little bit what goes into the upfront cost for some of these projects?
Yeah, and actually, our trees, we don't use bare root seedlings that are $1. We don't use $1 a tree. I mean, I'm fascinated by it. I'm supportive of any reforestation project that goes into the ground. $1 one tree for us is not going to produce the kind of quality project that we have. So if we're looking at a tree itself, depending on, and we do a lot of 1 gallon trees and what we call premium bare roots, which are like 2-year-old bare roots, but they've got an established root system, are probably in that $2, $3, or $4 range. But the thing is, the labor is very expensive. So the labor, if you're doing it properly, is like twice that amount right off the bat. And if you're looking at hydrological considerations, again, to do this properly, to support these high-quality reforestation projects, those have to be addressed on a site-specific basis. So there aren't any couple $100 an acre projects that we've been involved in, and if somebody can do it that way and successfully, I'd like to know how they're doing it.
Yeah, I would just add a lot of, post-management, right, after your post-planting management. So, you're going to have a lot of shrub and brush competition depending on how quickly you can get the seedling in. And that can be extremely expensive depending on how you want to go about it, right? You can herbicide, you could do it manually on some lands, prescribe burns. And then I think also what's really important, I don't think we should be just we should be putting trees in the ground, but there should also be, some management plans in place to take care of those trees, both right in that for those first few years, but also longer term, right? So some thinnings, depending on what the restoration objective is. You might be planting trees. There might be an invasive layer of understory that's going to grow back. So maybe you want to keep, you want to get canopy cover, really dense canopy cover, full canopy cover for a number of years to help you deal with that other restoration issue you're working on. So depending on what those other objectives are, I think you can have a lot of costs, in the first couple decades. And then you might be in a situation where further management, pays for itself with a commercial thinning. But yeah, there's a lot of work after that first year as well.
I think that comes back to when the question came up earlier about quality projects. None of us are sort of like, that means low cost, right? The reality is the cost that comes with those type of quality projects.
Any other questions? Yep.
I have a question for Julius. Since you develop these projects, I wonder if you could talk about what you look for in projects that would be a good fit for landowners, that would be a good fit for a reforestation project. Is there a certain demographic of landowners, certain scale? And then a separate question is you talked about some of the challenges of those conversations with landowners. I'm wondering what sort of questions they have or concerns about entering a program like this and doing a reforestation project from a landowner perspective.
I think, certainly the bigger the better, and it's easier to do projects, right? There's a fixed cost associated I mean, all this per acre stuff is scalable, but there's also the fixed cost of the carbon development, with putting together the documentation, all the verification, and then all the work it takes to originate one of those projects, all the conversations you have to have. So I think it's going to vary depending on, what folks' internal costs are in terms of what the minimum acreage is going to be. But for us, we're a nonprofit, so we're trying to do smaller projects too. So we're looking at things in the hundreds of acres and up. But that's going to vary depending on who you're talking to. And then I think a lot of time goes into explaining carbon markets to landowners and to people, and then you have to, that might take you 12 months, and then you got to explain it to their attorney for another 12 months. So that's I think one of the big challenges. Yeah.
A lot of landowners were burned in some of the previous efforts in carbon, where they were you had aggregators coming in making promises that really didn't deliver back in the 2008 area, and they're out there now as well. They're out there now, and actually our NRCS partners, I mean, I must get a call once a week saying that they're reaching out to these landowners and really kind of muddying the water as to what their promises are, understanding they have no money, their ability to deliver is questionable, and also they're not bringing to the table what really benefits the landowner long term. So that creates a challenge.
What kind of receptivity do you get from landowners, like percentage-wise, say? Is it most of them are not very receptive to the idea of doing reforestation on their lands?
No, not at all. But first of all, if Restore the Earth walked in to Arkansas as Restore the Earth and started knocking on landowners' doors, they'd kick us out in 5.5 seconds. I mean, the significance of our partnership with NRCS, all of these NRCS partners are located in every county in the United States. They're part of the community. They have the relationships with the landowners. They're interactive with the landowners all the time. So guess who, and they don't bring us in a high visibility, guess who comes in with NRCS? And as a result, the NRCS and Restore the Earth together are bringing to the table the opportunity. Many of them have already signed up for the opportunity, where they want the reforestation on their lands and they want permanent conservation easements, and they hadn't considered the added benefits of being able to have an opportunity to share in the revenues for the carbon offsets. And in our case, we will also, as the water markets hopefully develop, water quality trading develops in a solid way, those are annual revenues where they have an opportunity to share in annual revenues that could be generated off of water quality credits. So we're really looking at it as a win-win partnership from that standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions from the audience? Not at the moment. Barbara, are there any kinds of reforestation projects in particular that you are focused on, like if you had your preferences to choose between different project conditions or different landowner types or sizes, do you have preferences like that within your approach?
It's a good question. I'd say there's a few areas as we look at consideration. I think because of the size and scale of the challenge ahead of us, and because of the size and scale that we bring with our base business, I do think we have a strategic advantage to be a partner who can help to bring very significant capital. And so it's probably more valuable for us to partner on some of the larger scale projects than it is to partner on a lot of smaller projects, because spending a ton of money up front is kind of what we do every day, right? If we're very used to making very large-scale upfront investments with very long payoff periods associated with our base oil and gas business. And so I think we're able to bring both that knowledge, the comfort with the risk, et cetera, to our partners to then be able to invest in larger scale projects. As I also look at it, we are a global company. We have relationships around the world, and so we'll probably look to do reforestation projects in areas where we already have a footprint. So we're looking at mangrove in Australia, where we have significant operations. We're looking at Gulf Coast opportunities. We'll look at West Coast opportunities. And I'd say that is not at the exclusion because we think they are better or worse, but there's a value that you bring with a knowledge of the local jurisdiction, a knowledge of the regulations, the connections with the community, et cetera, that it's advantageous to us and hopefully makes us a better partner of choice in a lot of these redevelopment and reforestation projects. So that's where we're strategically focused. But it's, I think as we look at the suite of options available to us, it's not because we want to exclude some or think they're worse. We just think we can bring more value by focusing on it, on those sort of areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, question back here.
Yeah, not so much a question, more of a comment. And I'm probably the least qualified person here to make comments, but I happen to be a tree planting contractor. And I just wanted to mention the labor issue. That's not the only challenge to reforestation, but it is one of the game stoppers, not getting the labor. So we've been planting, my family, since the 70s, and we've kind of evolved with the times. But all the tree planting that gets done in at least the United States is done with guest workers, the migrant guest worker program. H-2A and H-2B visas were basically started in 1991. That's kind of when they were invented. And they haven't been updated since then. And so the cap remains the same that it was then. So we have a very difficult time getting labor, and it's industry-wide. And so if you talking about sowing your seeds or even comb collecting, you can kind of increase your area and look for sources outside of your traditional areas, but you still need labor. But you can find different sources. At the nursery, you can find different nurseries to order your seeds. You still need labor. Tree planting, you've got to have labor. But all that labor comes through the Department of Labor and on those visa programs. So that's a major bottleneck. That's like the bottleneck on your projects. And so the people involved in that are our congressmen, they're our senators and our representatives. And if that doesn't make you nervous, I mean, that's out of our control. But there's people here, I feel like, that kind of enter and exit those circles. And just mentioning that the labor issue is something that they need to address, that we need to address. I'm not aware of a bill currently that addresses it, but each time the cap is hit, it gets hit twice a year. It's 33,000 permits every 6 months. Every 6 months, there's almost 100,000 applicants, and they're all well, vetted. When I apply for labor, I have to advertise for 6 weeks for positions, and I don't get any responses locally, zero. And I have a track record. I can show that for the last 5 years, and I'm not the only one. So every 6 months the cap gets hit, and the Department of Secretary of Defense. Anyways, Homeland Security, that's who it is. Homeland Security, they can actually waive the cap. And so there are mechanisms in that could fix it, but it's not a conversation that people seem to be having. They kind of mix it up with migration and with, it's totally separate deal. But it would be, I would be remiss not to bring that up, being a contractor here, and say that whenever you have an opportunity to talk to your congressman, you bring up the H-2B program, which our forest labor falls into that category. It needs to be fixed. It needs to be either lifted. We need to go over to H-2A, which is agriculture with no cap, or we need to define something else for forestry. But without labor, it just
You know, that's a really good, first of all, I'd love to talk to you because one of the things that we're heavily involved in Washington, and one of the things that it always is amazing to me, and I hadn't really honestly even thought about that, but what amazes me that does happen in Washington is the lack of interaction or awareness of all these departments have with each other. I mean, we were actually asked by the U.S. Forest Service to make introductions to our NRCS partners, and they're right across the street from each other. I mean, it just boggles my mind. So I'd like to talk to you because as we're engaged in some of this stuff, I think that's something that we'd like to put a little bit of awareness with the folks that we're dealing with to see if we could broker bringing some of this interaction together, because it really creates, it's like they're functioning in silos. The left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. That was a very good point.
Yeah, my only disagreement is your comment that you're the least qualified person in the room.
Exactly.
I would assert you're very well qualified to opine in this area.
Well, thank you. That was very kind.
Yeah, one more question.
No. We've had experience with, actually from our one of the partners that we were supporting was doing drone seed dropping. I mean, it's so random, it's so, iffy that it's something that with the kind of investment that needs to be made, and again, you're losing a season. I mean, there are all kinds of things. We were supportive of trying to see how that would work, but it was so random. It was just not successful at all.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. I think that's all we have time for today. So I want to thank our panelists, Julius, Barbara, and PJ, for this wonderful conversation. Enjoy the rest of the conference.